you're basically measuring yourself against those metrics. Where are you performing? Where are the weaknesses? And you're just documenting that this is what you have done. You can have positive impacts or you can have negative impacts. If you have, say, solar on your roof, that's a positive impact. You're lowering your carbon footprint, so you're measuring that. In terms of social, do you have training programs for your workers? Do you have a pension plan? These are things that businesses tackle with the whole time. In terms of governance, do you or have you submitted your annual report to the COJ?
ESG has become one of the latest buzz phrases in the business world. But what is it and why should your business care? I'm Kalila Reynolds and it's time for another episode of Money Moves, JA, brought to you in partnership with EXIM Bank's Business Advisory Service, giving you the tools to grow your business. My guest today is Ainsley Brown. He's a sustainable development expert and he'll tell us all about it. Hi Ainsley, welcome to Money Moves, JA.
Thank you.
So good to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
All right, let's talk ESG.
Yes.
First of all, what does that even mean?
Well, it stands or is short for environmental, social, and governance. It basically is just a system that measures the sustainability of a company, or you could even apply it to your personal life if you really wanted to. It also is a system to measure risks and also detect opportunities for improvement.
So how do we do that?
It's depending on who you speak to, it can be difficult or it can be hard. I believe it is relatively simple. It is basically doing what you do. A company, no matter how big or small, is doing ESG. They just don't know or haven't measured it in that way. So if you look at it from the perspective of the environment, you have certain environmental regulations. That's the basement, that's the floor. Or the standards that you have to abide by. The law says you must do X. The industry that you belong to may have some certain standards as well, or your own personal company may have a standard as well. And you're basically measuring yourself against those metrics. Where are you performing? Where are the weaknesses? And you're just documenting that this is what you have done. You can have positive impacts or you can have negative impacts. If you have, say, solar on your roof, that's a positive impact. You're lowering your carbon footprint, so you're measuring that. In terms of social, do you have training programs for your workers? Do you have a pension plan? These are things that businesses tackle with the whole time. In terms of governance, do you or have you submitted your annual report to the COJ to say, this is what I did over the year? Maybe your particular industry may call for a particular type of reporting. Are you doing that? Do you have women on your board? What's the percentage? What's the industry best standard for your particular industry? So you're measuring yourself against those particular standards. The lowest standard, of course, being the law itself. If the law mandates that you must do, then that's the basement. I don't like people thinking of that as the highest, because think about the Titanic, for example. Titanic set sail, it wasn't breaking the law when it had very few lifeboats on board. And I don't think you want to compare yourself to that standard.
Right,
you
right.
want to be at a much higher standard.
So this is such great information, but I'm thinking, how do I even know where I measure? Is there any set of guidelines that we can follow?
The whole ESG philosophy, if you so to speak, is evolving. So there's a lot of information out there. Unfortunately, a lot of it is not tailored towards smaller type businesses, like particularly that we have in Jamaica. But you can read a lot online that outlines exactly how you conduct ESG. Some people think of ESG as simply corporate social responsibility, but it goes far beyond. It's in essence who you are and what you do. How do you allocate resources? I personally like to call ESG EESG because the economic side has to be factored in. How you make your money and where you spend your money. So how do you do it in terms of governance? Where is it going in terms of, remuneration for board members, as an example? in terms of social, what's your gender breakdown, and especially at the managerial level. For the environmental, what positive or negative impacts are you having on the environment? And ESG, people often mistake it for something that, impact investing, for example. It's connected, but the two things are not quite the same things. And ESG is not intended to save the world. It's not intended to take us to net zero in terms of carbon emissions and all of that. It's not about that. It's literally a system to measure your sustainable performance. And sustainability, you have to measure not just the green side, not the environmental side only. You have to measure the social, the governance, the economic. You have to measure all of them in combination.
You mentioned a phrase earlier, CSR, corporate social responsibility, and I do feel like over the past 2-3 years, ESG has replaced all the talk about CSR.
Correct.
So CSR is a part of ESG?
Correct. It is a part, but it is not exactly the same. CSR has, in fact, evolved over the years. Typically, when we think of CSR, we think of, you sponsor the local football team or, the cricket team or the youth club or something like that. That's great, and that is still part of CSR, but CSR is much more deeper and much more ingrained into the company's practices, and it's become part of what the company does, and it isn't separated as this is our CSR program and then this is what we do. It's now becoming one and the same. Similarly to ESG, as I said before, it's a system of just measuring your performance. And the great thing is you get to set what those metrics are. There are some international standards that are evolving and coming out, but you can, if you're going to do an audit on yourself, you can set the standard, of course, the lowest being what the law requires. If there isn't one, isn't a law that says there isn't a mandate for women to serve on boards per se in Jamaica, but in some jurisdictions that exists. So you couldn't use that in Jamaica, but you could use a benchmark to say 50-50, right? 50-50 split, or even in your managerial levels and so forth. So you can set the benchmark and then measure yourself against that performance. And the great thing about ESG is that it both adds value and also saves as well. So there are aspects or lowers transactions costs. So banks are now looking at it. So you can get a better interest rate.
Really?
Better terms, perhaps longer terms or for a longer period of time. So banks are looking into it, but you have to have something to show them, like, yes, I've conducted an audit. Here are my benchmarks that I'm measuring myself against. And these are the results.
So where would this be included? Would it be part of, say, your annual report, or do you do a special report on your ESG performance?
You can do both, but more companies are moving towards included in their annual report. I think, best of my knowledge, I think Grace Kennedy is the only one that has done a ESG report in Jamaica. To the best of my knowledge, I could be wrong, and I think they included it in their annual report.
It's not required now, but it's good practice.
No, it's very excellent practice. It touches on all the stakeholders, whether it be your lenders, whether it be your customers, whether it be your suppliers. And increasingly, we live in a globalized world, and in some jurisdictions, certain aspects of ESG are becoming mandatory. So people have to report on their carbon emissions. Some people have to report on whether or not their supply chain has slavery or exploitation of people. And you might find that your supplier or even the people that you're selling to are asking you some very strange questions. Why? Because they have to go back home and report that, yes, this person I transacted with has declared that their supply chain is okay.
Do consumers here actually care about these issues? I know, like in more developed countries, the consumers, many of them, yes, they're active. You have activist groups who want to make sure that they hold, especially big companies, accountable for greenhouse emissions and all these things. But in our region, in the Caribbean, do we actually care about that?
We do indirectly. People may not be using the language of ESG, but they do care about it indirectly because following ESG principles can actually lower costs. and those can be transmitted or passed on to the consumer. Also, we live in a wider environment, so nobody wants to live beside the smokestack that's belching out heavy smoke or anything like that. So people do care, but they care in a way that it's indirect. It's not so much, yes, you must be ESG, and if you're not, I'm not going to invest in you, I'm not going to buy your product. They care indirectly. They have companies that follow ESG principles. You know, they can lower their regulatory costs or the regulatory risks, them being fined, their insurance costs. All of these different cost factors add up, and you know, at the end of the day, it's the consumer that pays. So if you can lower all of those, the consumer will benefit, albeit indirectly.
All right, thanks so much, Ainsley. Do you have any resources, anywhere we can go to find more information about this?
Yes, you can go to McKinsey & Co. They're very good at it, and also PwC. They're also very good at supplying information on ESG.
Okay, thanks again. All the best.
Thank you.
Here's a recap of Ainsley's key points. Environmental, social, and governance (ESG) is a system used to measure your company's performance. Banks are now requesting companies' ESGs. ESG is not a requirement for businesses, but it's good practice. ESG principles can lower cost.
That's it for this episode of Money Moves JA, brought to you in partnership with EXIM Bank's Business Advisory Service, giving you the tools to grow your business. Visit their website at eximbankja.com and visit my website, KalilaReynolds.com, for a summary of this episode. I'm Kalila Reynolds. Till next time.